A few episodes back, I came out as a YouTube Bible host who likes Game of Thrones, and everybody was really nice to me about it, so I've decided to push my luck and talk more about Game of Thrones, while again reminding you, I don't recommend it for children or anyone. This Jon Snow character goes up and joins this warrior monk group of guys who defend this giant ice wall to keep the bad things that are north of the wall from coming south of the wall and wreaking havoc on the realms of men. And when these sworn brothers of the Night's Watch join the organization, they have to take this binding oath that limits them on basically everything fun they would ever want to do. There's a tremendous cost associated with joining the Night's Watch. And if you're familiar with Bible, you know that Jesus talked a lot about there being a cost associated with following him. And in fact, that's in Luke 14, which, I had that marked, so I'm just going to flip right over to that. I even know the verse because I looked at it on that sheet of paper. It's starting in verse 28. He said, "Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and isn't able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or suppose a king's about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he'll send a delegation while the other's still a long way off, and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple." And the people who were following Jesus, that the account of the book of Acts records, would have clearly remembered that Jesus said that. He was never shy about saying, there's a cost associated with following me. You might have to give up a lot. You might have to give up your own life. And in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, we see a couple of people who were there when Jesus said that, would have remembered that Jesus said that, and now are living out the reality of what Jesus said as they go through really difficult stuff. So again, Acts 12, 1 through 5. I'm just going to read the whole thing again because it's short. "It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him." Luke's a good author. He tells a good story. He does a really good job of moving us in these marvelous waves through the story. You've got these high points where great things are happening with the church, like, say, God equipping a prophet to predict a famine and then to get the church to gather some money to take care of the people who are going to be most affected by the famine. That's a good thing. But it's always followed up with something that's destructive, the next threat to the church, to demonstrate that God still has the church's back. And that's what we run into here. The bad guys are back on screen now, and this time it's a guy named Herod. Now, there have been a lot of Herods who we've run into so far, and the first Herod that really matters to our story is a guy named Herod Antipater, who goes all the way back to the time of Caesar and Pompey. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. Pompey died a handful of years before that in Egypt. So we're talking close to 100 years before the time that we're looking at here is our first encounter with a Herod. That Herod kind of got into bed politically with those guys, politically settled down, and as a result, he was able to secure power for his family in the province of Judea. The Herod family also got along well with Julius Caesar's godson, who became the first emperor of Rome, a guy named Caesar Augustus. And Caesar Augustus really solidified the Herod family's power in Judea. And so Herod the Great is the guy who was empowered by Caesar Augustus. He had big building projects. He's the one who wanted to kill all the babies and the accounts of Jesus' birth and everything. And he was nuts and his life ended weird. But he had kids. And so we also run into Herod Antipas right here. Seriously, dude, you're blocking the thing. And Herod Antipas is the son of Herod the Great, and he's the guy who briefly had Jesus on trial at the end of the Gospels in the Passion account. The Herod we are reading about here is none of those guys. This is Herod Agrippa, and he is a nephew of Herod Antipas, who is the son of Herod the Great, who was the son of Herod Antipater. I think I've got that right. He was educated in Rome. He ran in the same circles as Caesar Augustus's family, and he was named for Marcus Agrippa, who was Caesar Augustus's best buddy. So he's very, very Roman. He understands Roman culture. He wants to make Roman people happy. But he doesn't get to rule anything Roman, he gets to rule Judea. So he also has to make the Jews happy, and that hasn't gone really well for him because the Jews are in a rebel mode right now. There's a strong contingent within Judaism that says we need to take up arms, just like we did back in the day with the Maccabees, and we need to overthrow these people. So the conundrum that he faces is trying to keep these two groups of people happy, demonstrate his competence as a governor, all while enriching himself. It's also interesting to me in verse 1 here that the bar in Luke's mind for what counts as persecution has been so raised that just being arrested doesn't count, but that they were arrested so that they could be persecuted. I would think of unlawful arrests as persecution. I'm totally against that. Don't want it to happen to me. But by contrast, verse 2, well, that's a lot worse because he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Luke is just so matter-of-fact about this. Yep, that happened. Even the way he writes indicates that everyone who followed Jesus at this time knew that that was a likely end at any given moment. To us, as we get the flyby version of these events from Luke, this is just a sad casualty, like a secondary character that you get a quick shot of getting blasted with a blaster rifle in Star Wars in the middle of a big action scene. And you just make a mental note, well, I guess that guy's down now. But this would have been a big deal to everybody who encountered this. They just lost somebody who they'd been in the trenches with from the very beginning. This was one of the first people to be called. This guy and his brother were called right in front of their dad. And the account in Matthew chapter 4 says they left their nets and they left their dad. And they went and followed Jesus. What would it have been like for that guy when he got this news? I mean, that's his kid. Would he have resented Jesus for calling him into something that was going to end badly? Or was he so moved by what he saw from Jesus and what he saw in his kids' lives that he would have, though grieving, accepted that his kid died for something that really, really mattered? I don't know. I just pause to point out that stuff like this happens fast in the Bible, but this would have sent shockwaves through the Christian community. But what about James? I'm sure this wasn't easy for him, but we know some things about what James had experienced in his life. Most notably at this moment, I think of Luke chapter 9, when Jesus invited James and 2 other disciples to go up on a mountain with him. And then when he went up there, Jesus was revealed and glorified. And for a few moments, they were able to see him in something that looked more like his form as God, in all of his glory and brightness, and with God affirming him in an irrefutable, supernatural, miraculous way. So James didn't walk into this situation with Herod thinking, man, I might die here. I really hope there's a God and I really hope there's a heaven and that this was all true. This guy would have been empirically certain of this in ways that most of us aren't. So you think about it, the first 2 martyrs that we read about in the book of Acts, Stephen and then James, both had incidents like this at some point in their lives where God reinforced their belief and gave them courage by showing them the reality of what they were living out. I'm sure this wasn't easy for James, but I'm sure that absolute clarity would have made it easier than it would have been without it. As I mentioned earlier, Herod had all kinds of PR problems with the Jews and with the Romans, and so he wants to score some more points. With what happens next, I picture Herod being like the guy at a party who accidentally stumbles onto a joke that hits, and a few people kind of laugh, and now all of a sudden he's going to grab the mic and crack a bunch more because he thinks he's got it figured out. So, hey, this thing worked really well with James. Well, why don't I go arrest Peter too? Would that make you all happy? I could do that. Should we kill Peter? And so he does that, and he locks them up real good with 4 squads of 4 soldiers each and keeps him under this armed guard. He's going to take him out for trial after the Passover. So Peter's kept in prison, and this little passage wraps up saying that the church was earnestly praying to God for him. So Herod's play here is twofold. 1, keep impressing the Jews. 2, don't get embarrassed again. You think about what we've seen so far in the first 11 chapters. The Jewish leadership hasn't exactly had the best track record of keeping arrested people arrested or dead people dead. They've been humiliated repeatedly by the work of God, and they do not want to repeat. This is a tiny little passage. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to hit pause before we get into looking at the ramifications of all of this. So I'm Matt. This is half of a 10-minute Bible hour. I'll see you next week.